The village of Little Bramble, nestled amid the gentle undulations of the South Downs, had a reputation for tranquility and the occasional mild scandal, of the sort that could be contained in the pages of the parish magazine. The low stone cottages, with their climbing ivy and smoke curling from red brick chimneys, seemed impervious to the passage of time, and its inhabitants prided themselves on the orderliness of their lives. Yet, on a particularly crisp March morning, a discovery threatened to shatter the village's peaceful veneer. Miss Jane Marple, a small, unassuming figure with keen eyes and a mind perpetually at work, had been enjoying her customary morning stroll along the narrow lanes. She was on her way to the village post office when the sight of a crowd near the edge of the wood caught her attention. Curiosity, always more persuasive than caution, drew her closer. The villagers parted politely as she approached, murmuring in hushed, agitated tones. It was Mr. Jonathan Pritchard, the local woodcutter, who had found the body. He stood at a distance, wiping his hands on a flour-dusted handkerchief, as though it might protect him from the horror of the scene. Beside a neatly stacked pile of firewood lay the lifeless form of Harold Tremaine, the manor's solicitor, and a man generally regarded as incorruptible, if somewhat austere. His coat was rumpled, and a faint smear of earth marked the hem of his trousers. There were no obvious signs of violence, yet the stillness of the body betrayed a calamity that words struggled to capture. Miss Marple, ever composed, noted small details that others overlooked. The firewood was stacked with precise care, the axe leaned against the stump at an angle as though recently used, and a single garden glove lay a few feet away, damp with morning dew. She observed the villagers' reactions with discreet interest. Some whispered in shock, others cast furtive glances, and a few, like young Emily Hargrove, tried to suppress tears. Among the first to arrive was Inspector Giles, a capable yet methodical officer whose presence exuded authority. He had known Miss Marple's reputation for solving mysteries in other villages and raised an eyebrow in polite acknowledgement. "Miss Marple, I do appreciate your discretion, but this is officially police business," he remarked, his tone courteous but firm. "Oh, I would never presume, Inspector," Miss Marple replied softly, though sometimes an old lady's eyes can see things that official procedures overlook. She glanced at the surrounding cottages and thought of the people who lived quietly, their secrets hidden beneath layers of routine. Often, it was these seemingly insignificant details that held the key. The villagers began recounting what little they knew. Mr. Pritchard had gone early to collect logs for the manor's fires and stumbled upon Harold lying beside the stack. He had assumed the man had tripped or fainted, but the unnatural stillness suggested otherwise. The household staff, led by Mrs. Penelope Green, the housekeeper, was summoned immediately. She arrived in her grey dress, clasping her hands in mild distress, whispering assurances that Harold had been meticulous in his routines, leaving no reason for him to be anywhere near the firewood without purpose. Miss Marple's mind ticked over quietly. Harold Tremaine had been a regular visitor to Little Bramble Hall, but he had few personal ties in the village itself. Who would have wished him harm? And yet, as she scanned the faces of the villagers, she detected subtle shifts, furtive glances, small flinches that suggested more than mere shock. People sometimes reacted not only to tragedy, but to the implications it might carry for themselves. As the body was carefully removed and the area cordoned off, Miss Marple noted a few details for later reflection. The ground near the firewood was soft, bearing the impressions of boots and perhaps one or two sets of unfamiliar footprints. A small note, partially crumpled, lay near a bush. "Meet me at dawn. Secrets must end." She tucked this into her pocket, the seed of a theory already germinating. Later that afternoon, the village seemed unnervingly still. The church clock tolled with solemn regularity, and the faint aroma of baked bread drifted from the bakery, reminding Miss Marple that life, even in moments of calamity, went on. She retired to her sitting room with a cup of tea, contemplating the arrival of Inspector Giles and the subtle tension that lingered in Little Bramble. She could feel the story quietly weaving itself together, if only one knew where to look. The following morning, Miss Marple visited Little Bramble Hall under the pretext of offering condolences. The house, a fine Georgian structure with a walled garden, seemed unusually silent, its grandeur dampened by unease. Mrs. Penelope Green met her at the door, eyes wary but respectful. "Miss Marple, I hardly know what to say." Harold was so proper. He had a plan for everything, Mrs. Green murmured, wringing her hands. Miss Marple's gaze roamed the room, noting small inconsistencies, a faint scent of almond from the kitchen, a chair slightly out of place, and the subtle dampness of the carpet near the fireplace. "Sometimes, Mrs. Green," she said gently, "the smallest things tell the largest stories." She began her inquiries by speaking to the household staff. Young Emily Hargrove, who managed the garden, admitted she had seen a figure near the woods at dawn, but could not identify who it was. The cook, Mr. Jenkins, mentioned Harold's unusual request for extra firewood the previous evening, insisting it was for something special, though he had not pressed for details. Each conversation revealed more threads, minor irritations, hidden rivalries, and unspoken resentments, yet no clear motive. Miss Marple also considered the visitors and family connected to Little Bramble Hall. Harold's nephew, Charles Tremaine, had recently been slighted over an inheritance dispute. Lady Eleanor Barton, a close friend of the deceased, seemed unnaturally composed, brushing off questions with polite deflection. Meanwhile, Dr. Lawrence Pevensey, the local physician, was insistent on ruling out any foul play, citing Harold's generally robust health. A critical breakthrough came when Miss Marple visited the woodpile itself. The careful stacking, she noted, suggested deliberate staging. Someone had deliberately placed Harold beside the logs to create a particular impression, perhaps to make it appear accidental. Yet the glove, the footprints, and the crumpled note hinted otherwise. Her intuition told her this was no mere misstep. It was an orchestrated event, designed to mislead. Returning to the village, she observed the subtle interactions of the villagers. Gossip was a delicate dance, often revealing more about the speaker than the subject. Miss Marple's sharp ears caught fragments, disputes over land, quiet jealousy over minor accolades, and hidden debts. She realized that while any one clue might seem insignificant, together they formed a pattern only discernible to a patient observer. By mid-afternoon, she had assembled her preliminary hypotheses. Was the motive financial, personal, or simply a matter of pride? And who, among those present, had both the opportunity and the cunning to stage such a scene? With Inspector Giles now actively involved, she decided it was time to follow the trail of minor inconsistencies, forgotten letters, overlooked footprints, and subtle changes in behavior. The morning after her initial inquiries, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle deepening. Little Bramble, usually a picture of calm, now seemed laced with undercurrents of suspicion. She began her rounds with quiet observation, knowing that, in villages like these, the truth often lingered in the everyday, a misplaced teacup. A glance held a moment too long, a hesitation in speech. The first puzzle emerged from Charles Tremaine, Harold's nephew. He had been remarkably composed, almost too composed, as if rehearsing civility. Over tea, he insisted on discussing Harold's meticulous habits, yet Miss Marple noticed a faint tremor in his hand when she mentioned the extra firewood. He always enjoyed the fire, Charles said lightly, yet his eyes darted toward the window that overlooked the woodpile, a subtle sign of unease. Next, Miss Marple observed Lady Eleanor Barton. She had arrived earlier than usual, claiming concern, yet her words carried a note of impatience. While discussing Harold's recent business dealings, she casually mentioned a dispute with the deceased over a minor inheritance. Miss Marple's sharp mind noted the discrepancy between Lady Eleanor's professed grief and the barely concealed relief in her tone. There was, she suspected, more than one layer to the relationships at Little Bramble Hall. Meanwhile, Dr. Pevensey had grown increasingly defensive. Miss Marple learned that Harold had recently altered his will to leave a sum to the village church, bypassing some family expectations. When she gently broached the subject, the doctor's brow furrowed, and he offered an over-earnest assurance that Harold's heart had been perfectly healthy. "Of course," he said. The man was vigorous. No one could have expected. His voice faltered. It was the kind of slip that Miss Marple had seen countless times, when truth threatened to surface. The careful veneer cracked. The day's most perplexing clue came unexpectedly from Emily Hargrove. She approached Miss Marple, cheeks flushed. I saw something yesterday morning," she whispered, glancing around to ensure no one overheard. "A man, I think, hiding near the woodpile. I didn't recognize him. He was wearing a hat and scarf. He left just as Mr. Pritchard found him." Miss Marple's mind raced. A stranger in the village, present at the precise moment of Harold's death, introduced a new layer of complexity. Was this an opportunist, a burglar gone wrong, or someone orchestrating a staged accident to disguise intent. Yet there was no sign of forced entry at the manor. If foul play was involved, it had been executed with subtlety and knowledge of Harold's routines. The following day, a small explosion of gossip occurred at the village market. Penelope Green confided to Miss Marple that she had overheard a heated argument between Harold and Dr. Pevensey the previous week. Harold, it seemed, had accused the doctor of mismanaging an inheritance-related document. The village's postmistress, ever eager to provide news, whispered of a visit from an unknown solicitor who had spoken privately with Harold the evening before his death. Each of these hints, isolated, seemed inconclusive, but Miss Marple noted them carefully, arranging them in the quiet of her thoughts like pieces on a chessboard. Suspicion briefly fell on Charles, the nephew, when a misplaced ledger was discovered, revealing recent withdrawals in Harold's accounts. The timing suggested motive, yet there was no indication that Charles had been present at the firewood on the fateful morning. Miss Marple, however, detected a subtle misdirection. Charles' behaviour seemed rehearsed, designed to attract attention away from the true culprit. The cleverness was almost theatrical, a classic ruse that Miss Marple had seen before. Lady Eleanor provided another diversion when she claimed to have found a half-burnt letter in the hearth. The note hinted at blackmail, but was destroyed before any reading could occur. Most villagers took this as evidence of a scandalous plot, yet Miss Marple suspected manipulation, a dramatic gesture to distract and frame the narrative. Even the crumpled note found beside the firewood now took on multiple possible meanings. By evening, Miss Marple sat in her modest sitting room, reflecting. She brewed tea and considered the sequence of events. The firewood had been stacked with care, Harold's body positioned deliberately, and the glove, oddly out of place, was a small but telling clue. Miss Marple's keen mind weighed the villagers' statements against the physical evidence, footprints in damp soil, a scuff mark on Harold's coat, and the subtle aroma of almonds in the kitchen, hinting at something unusual had been ingested. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint knock. It was Emily, wide-eyed and hesitant. She handed Miss Marple a small envelope found near the back garden hedge. Inside was a brief message. The truth is not in the firewood, but in the manor's heart. The cryptic note confirmed Miss Marple's suspicion that the seemingly mundane setting concealed a deliberate plot. The deception was layered, relying on staged accident, distraction, and villagers' natural assumptions. By the close of Act 2, Miss Marple had assembled a constellation of motives, clues, and red herrings. Each suspect had a plausible motive: Charles, the greedy nephew; Lady Eleanor, with her concealed agenda; Dr. Pevensey, with secret knowledge; and even minor staff, who had grievances both personal and professional. The puzzle, intricate and delicate, demanded the sharpest observation and the most patient deduction. Miss Marple's keen intuition told her that the final piece would emerge not from confrontation, but from careful scrutiny of behaviour, minor inconsistencies, and the natural sequence of events. The village of Little Bramble, serene on the surface, had concealed ambition, envy, and misdirection, a tapestry only the most subtle of observers could unravel. And Miss Marple, sipping her tea, quietly smiled. The moment of revelation was near, and she would need every ounce of her experience to untangle it. The following morning, a silvery mist clung to Little Bramble, draping the cottages and hedgerows in an ethereal hush. Miss Marple, as always, moved quietly along the familiar lanes, her mind whirring with the intricacies of the case. She had spent the night reviewing her notes, the villagers' statements, and her own observations, piecing together the seemingly random fragments into a coherent pattern. Returning to Little Bramble Hall, Miss Marple requested a private audience with Inspector Giles. She found him in the library, poring over reports and evidence. "Inspector," she began gently, "I believe that the time has come to consider the sequence of events not as isolated incidents, but as deliberate steps in a plan. Each act, each misdirection, has been carefully orchestrated." Giles looked up, intrigued yet cautious. "You think you know who did this, Miss Marple?" "Not entirely," she replied. "But I am certain the truth lies in observing behaviour rather than merely collecting physical evidence. Often, it is the small, human gestures that reveal intent." Miss Marple began her methodical reconstruction. Harold Tremaine, she realized, had been deliberately lured to the woodpile under the guise of routine. The note she had found, "Meet me at dawn. Secrets must end." was not from a stranger but carefully planted to mislead the witnesses and create the illusion of a mysterious intruder. The glove, left beside the logs, was a staging device placed deliberately to suggest an accident rather than a planned confrontation. Her thoughts turned to Lady Eleanor Barton. Miss Marple had observed subtle inconsistencies in her composure, particularly her knowledge of Harold's altered will and the half-burnt letter. The lady's calm demeanour and strategic disclosures suggested more than casual involvement. Yet, as Miss Marple contemplated motives, she realised Lady Eleanor's stake, though significant, could not alone explain the elaborate ruse at the woodpile. The puzzle's central figure, she concluded, was Dr. Lawrence Pevensey. The almond scent Miss Marple had detected in the kitchen was a telltale clue: bitter almonds, indicative of a substance sometimes used to simulate natural death. Dr. Pevensey, who had access to Harold's routines and knowledge of his health, had both motive and means. The recent argument between Harold and the doctor regarding legal documents, combined with Harold's decision to divert part of his inheritance away from family expectations, provided the motive. Yet the brilliance of the crime lay in its layered misdirection. Miss Marple, after reviewing the footprints, the glove, and the sequence of interactions, formulated a hypothesis. Dr. Pevensey had lured Harold to the woodpile, provided him with a concoction intended to incapacitate, and arranged the scene to appear accidental. The glove was removed deliberately to create confusion, the crumpled note, to mislead those who might discover the body. Lady Eleanor, perhaps unwittingly, aided the deception by emphasizing the discovery of the half-burnt letter and creating an atmosphere of scandal. Armed with this insight, Miss Marple invited the key suspects to the drawing room under the pretense of discussing the manor's affairs. Each entered with polite curiosity, unaware that the trap was not for them, but for the truth itself. She began by calmly recounting the sequence of events, deliberately highlighting minor discrepancies, seemingly innocent observations, and villagers' statements. "Do notice," she said, her voice light yet precise, "how the firewood was stacked with care. Such care, I am afraid, is rarely the result of mere chance. And observe the glove, found quite apart from Mr. Tremaine. Such details, though small, reveal the presence of human intention behind what might otherwise appear to be accident." Eyes flickered among the group. Charles Tremaine looked uneasy. Lady Eleanor maintained her composure with thinly veiled concern, and Dr. Pevensey, who had remained outwardly calm, suddenly appeared to understand that the web of subtle observations was closing in on him. Miss Marple continued, her voice gentle yet relentless. "Harold Tremaine, as we all know, was meticulous. He would not, under ordinary circumstances, wander near the woodpile at dawn without reason. Yet, the morning of his death, he was present alone, or so it seemed. The trace of almonds in the kitchen, the staged footprints, the glove deliberately left to mislead, these point not to accident, but to a plan executed with knowledge of his habits." The room fell silent. Even Lady Eleanor's faint cough could not mask the tension. Finally, Miss Marple's gaze settled on Dr. Pevensey. "Dr. Pevensey, it is clear to me that you, with access to both the victim's routines and the knowledge of his health, orchestrated this event. Your quarrel regarding the legal documents, your awareness of his will, and your ability to manipulate the scene, all indicate that you intended to create the appearance of misadventure, when in truth—" She paused, allowing the weight of her deduction to settle. "The outcome was very deliberately ensured." Dr. Pevensey's face drained of colour. For a moment, he attempted denial, then faltered. The intricate layering of evidence, subtle behavioural observations, and Miss Marple's uncanny insight proved inescapable. He confessed quietly, revealing that Harold's diversion of inheritance had triggered a panic, leading to a scheme meant to simulate an accidental death, but executed without anticipating the meticulous observation of a patient old lady. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, serene. "One must always remember," she said gently, "that it is the human element, the small inconsistencies, the inadvertent reveals, and the gestures we consider trivial, that ultimately tell the truth. Even the cleverest plan cannot entirely outwit human nature." As Inspector Giles took Dr. Pevensey into custody, the room's tension slowly relaxed. Charles Tremaine and Lady Eleanor exchanged glances, relieved that the truth, though uncomfortable, restored order. The mystery of the firewood, the glove, and the crumpled note was resolved through patience, observation, and the quiet intelligence of one who had long understood the subtle truths hidden in the ordinary rhythms of village life. The village of Little Bramble slowly returned to its customary rhythm, though the echoes of recent events lingered like the last wisps of morning mist. News of Dr. Pevensy's confession and subsequent arrest spread quietly, carried by the soft murmur of gossip at the bakery, the post office, and the church steps. Yet, unlike other villages, Little Bramble retained a sense of propriety. The villagers knew that curiosity was to be tempered with discretion, especially after witnessing the quiet genius of Miss Marple at work. Miss Marple herself, perched in her favourite armchair with a cup of fragrant tea, reflected on the events that had unfolded. The intricate interplay of human motives, seemingly trivial habits, and subtle deceptions had provided a tapestry rich with clues, if only one had the patience to observe them. She allowed herself a small smile, recalling how the crumpled note, the glove, and even the faint scent of almonds had all played their parts in revealing the truth. It was, she thought, a reminder that life in a quiet village might appear simple, but beneath its placid surface, the complexities of human nature were never far from view. A week later, Miss Marple visited Little Bramble Hall to offer final condolences to the remaining family and staff. Lady Eleanor Barton greeted her with a gentle curtsy, her expression tinged with both gratitude and lingering concern. "Miss Marple, I cannot thank you enough," she said quietly. "Your insight has spared the village from endless speculation and from worse misunderstandings." "Sometimes," Miss Marple replied, smoothing her gloves, "one sees more when one merely listens and watches. People often reveal more in ordinary moments than they intend." Charles Tremaine appeared more composed than when last seen. He had come to terms with his uncle's passing and the necessary legal adjustments. "I must admit, Miss Marple," he said, "your observations were extraordinary. I had suspected no one so carefully, yet everything fell into place as you suggested." Miss Marple inclined her head, acknowledging the compliment with her customary quiet dignity. Mrs. Penelope Green, the housekeeper, had also restored order to the manor. She recounted how the staff, initially unsettled by the death, now felt a sense of closure. "It's astonishing," she remarked, "how much the simplest observations can reveal. We might have gone on guessing forever, if not for your unique perspective." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. It was precisely these ordinary observations, she thought, that allowed the extraordinary to be uncovered. The village itself slowly resumed its regular patterns. Children played in the lanes, the church bell tolled punctually, and the local market resumed its gentle bustle. Yet, in subtle ways, Little Bramble had been changed. Villagers spoke more carefully, mindful that even minor actions could reveal deeper truths. And Miss Marple, observing from the periphery, found comfort in the familiar rhythms of life resuming its course. In the manor's library, she lingered one last time, reflecting on the strands of human nature she had witnessed. Dr. Pevensy's panic over inheritance, the nephew's quiet manoeuvring, Lady Eleanor's delicate diplomacy, and even the minor tensions among staff, all had combined to create a scenario that could easily have remained unsolved. It was patience, keen observation, and the understanding of human foibles that had unveiled the sequence of events. Over tea with Emily Hargrove, the young gardener who had first reported the mysterious figure near the woodpile, Miss Marple imparted a gentle lesson. "Curiosity is a useful companion," she said, "but observation is its wiser cousin. One must watch and listen, and sometimes even the smallest gesture or misstep tells the entire story." Emily nodded thoughtfully, inspired by the quiet power of reason and subtlety. As the sun dipped below the rolling hills of the South Downs, the manor and village settled into an evening of calm reflection. Miss Marple, walking back along the familiar lanes toward her cottage, glanced at the firewood stacked neatly beside the path. The scene, once the stage for deception and fear, now lay quiet, its secrets laid bare by insight and patience. And so, life in Little Bramble returned to its gentle rhythm, as it always did after storms of human drama. The villagers had learned, in small but meaningful ways, that appearances were rarely the full story, and that the wisdom of one observant mind, small, unassuming, yet unerringly precise, could illuminate truths hidden beneath the ordinary. Miss Marple's small smile lingered as she opened the gate to her cottage, poured herself another cup of tea, and settled into her chair. Another puzzle had been solved, justice served in the quiet, unassuming way that only she could manage. The firewood beside the lane, once the scene of tragedy, now stood as a testament to the clarity that patience, observation, and a little intuition could bring. Life, in Little Bramble, continued, subtly enriched by the lessons of truth, human nature, and the gentle, watchful eyes of Miss Jane Marple.